So welcome to the Node.js Technical Steering Committee meeting for April 23rd, 2020. We'll follow the standard agenda, which was in the issue tagged in the repository. Before we get started, does anybody have any announcements that they'd like to share? Okay, if we don't have any,
I could share a really quick one.
Okay.
Node 14 went out on Tuesday. Super exciting, and a number of people on this call were actively involved in that release. A bunch of people who were listening might also have been involved, but just in general, it's pretty exciting to have it out the door. It will be our next big LTS release, and yeah, that's about it.
No, that's a good point. Good thing to point out.
And thank you to Beth for the work championing that, moving it forward.
Woo,
yep.
Beth.
Yay. And I guess I'll also say it's, as always, we'd like people to try that out for the next 6 months before it becomes LTS to make sure that, by the time we get there, we've shaken out any issues and it's ready to go. Okay, any other announcements? If not, in terms of the board, there is a board meeting this week. So I don't think there's anything on the board that people are waiting from me, other than some of the ones like the build stuff that there was an update on last week. If there is something, let me know, or if there's something new, let me know on that front too, and we'll bring it up.
The only thing I would say there, I haven't had an opportunity to reach out to, I think it's Brian, on the signed off by. It would be good if we can get an update on that and where that's at some point. We don't.
So I have been regularly pinging him on that. It sounds like he's hoping within the next couple of weeks he'll have a PR for changes into Probot to help make it easier to turn that on.
So the question there is, should we go ahead and land that proposed change that I had to the policy that asks people to go ahead and start adding the signed off by, or are we going to wait for that tooling to be in place?
I guess it depends on, like in my mind, it would depend on if we want to enforce it. It might be better waiting a couple weeks so that the remediation is easier. Okay. The other thing I did do is we had a couple new repos. So for that repo, I've actually enabled the current version just to try it out and get a little bit of experience. And there's only 1 or 2 people who might be landing things there. We'll see, what they run into. Okay. But yeah, so like if everybody was like, let's just land that and then only like turn on the enforcement later on, that might be okay. But I'm also like, if it's only a few weeks out, let's just wait. If it stretches out, it keeps, if it keeps being 2 weeks, maybe we need to do something, but. Okay. I will give me a quick note there. James asked about DCO. I'll fill that in afterwards. Okay. Any other questions, things on that front? No. Okay. Moving on to the things tagged in the agenda. So the first one is OpenSSL security release 1.1.1G vulnerability high. I think, Sam, do you want to chime in on that one?
Sorry, I missed that. Which vulnerability?
It's OpenSSL security release 1.1.1G. I think it was, may have been on the agenda last week. I can't remember as an FYI, but since it's come out.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. Sorry, that should have been removed from the agenda. If it affected Node.js, then we would have had to discuss it and decide the timing of a release. But it doesn't affect us, so we don't have to discuss it. And there's no more to be said about it.
Okay, so are you going to close or remove the tag?
Yeah, the issue should be closed now, I think. But yes.
Okay, maybe if it's already closed.
I'll remove the tag too.
I'll do it too. Okay. The next one is nominating at Joanne Narabol as a collaborator.
That's already been done. And Anna has closed the issue, so I think that one should have been removed also.
Okay.
Yep, that has been resolved by adding it.
Perfect. Okay. So I guess, yeah, just when the issue was generated, it was still there. Next one then is process throw exception on unhandled rejection equals default. This is actually something which we added on request at the start of the meeting. So was James, did you want to handle that one, or was it?
Well, I'm sure there's a couple of us that that have opinions on it. I'm sure Ruben does, and Anna. And as Ruben's pointed out, there's a couple of PRs here. Basically, to give a summary for everybody listening, is Node will currently emit a warning and a deprecation warning when you have a unhandled rejection, but it'll otherwise continue to operate. Ruben, I think it was last year, added the command line flag to enable a strict mode that allows it to throw immediately. The proposal is to switch the default to that strict mode.
No, that's not correct.
Not quite. Okay. All right. Then, yeah, there's been so many different PRs on this, Ruben, that I've kind of lost track myself. So why don't you do the summary on it, and then I'll offer my opinion after.
Yeah. So there were actually 3 proposals, and the first one was exactly what you said, to switch the default to the strict mode. But this PR is already closed because there was one -1 on the PR, and then an alternative was open up to change the current behavior of all 3 modes that existed in a way that they adhere to the current unhandled rejections hook. At the moment, it's completely independent. If you have the hook in place or not, the hook will work, but the flag will have a higher priority as such. And if it says, for example, strict, it will, in that case, still throw an uncaught exception. And if it's warned, then it will just suppress the warning and the deprecation warning. Otherwise, it's identical to... Thank you very much. I was just notified that it was actually closed because the tests were failing, and it would be, and that the author thought it would be easier to go with a different approach, and that would be more widely accepted. But let's continue with the summary first. So the other one, it would just suppress the warning and the deprecation warning. That is it. And then there's none, which would just print no warning at all if you don't have the hook in place, which would have done otherwise.
So what was, sorry, I didn't catch, like, what's the fundamental change in the second one? It's like the first sentence I missed that you had, which I think was the summary.
Okay, so with these 3 PRs, and let's go through each PR one at a time. The first one suggested to change the default to strict mode.
Yeah, got it.
That's it. The second one suggested to change the defaults in a way that the unhandled rejections hook is higher prioritized. At the moment, the hook and the flag is independently working. And from then on, it would change that if you have the hook in place, but you would use strict mode, that it would not crash anymore. That it would not throw an uncaught exception. That's the main change. In the third one, it was suggested to add a new force mode, which is not there at the moment, which is somewhere in between the warning mode and the strict mode. It's like a semi-strict. And what it does is it would throw an uncaught exception in case there is no unhandled rejections hook in place.
Okay. Thank you, Ruben, for the clarification on that. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And is is that the default? So basically, for the current one, 33021.
Yeah, it looks like that one is there. That one, yeah, the third one.
Right. So is it? But is like if it adds that mode, is that just another mode you can select, or has it become the default mode?
No, it was suggested as new default.
Okay.
So
for the third one, and for the first one, it was also suggested to, well, that was only about changing the default. And in the second one, it was also suggested to be changed with the default. So all of them were Zemver major.
Second one, Ruben, just want to make sure I understand. The second one moved the unhandled rejection hook to higher priority. So if it was set, it would not emit the warning. But otherwise, it would not fail.
Sorry, it would not only not warn, but it would also not throw an uncaught exception in case you were using the strict mode.
Okay. So, yeah. I mean, all of these, based on those descriptions, are is definitely. I mean, I don't think any of them actually influence the behavior I would like to see. Where I think I'd almost prefer it to be a hybrid of the second option, where the strict mode would still throw immediately, but the default would be look for the unhandled rejection hook. And if that's not there, then warn, but without the deprecation warning. Right. So it gives us the progression where strict is always throw. You have the option of, the fallback is you have the option of the unhandled rejection handler, and then you have the warning.
Well, I personally, the third one was a suggestion about something similar, but about the semi-strict, right? Where you would only throw in case you don't have a hook in place. So this is a completely new mode, and we could add that independently. So this mode could be added as a Zemver minor if we don't change it immediately as a default.
Yeah, I don't like the option of it of like if somebody wants it to throw, right, then I typically want it to throw right when it happens, so they're preserving the context of, as much as possible, the application state when it threw. That's where it's most useful, right? Having it throw further down the line, after you've already lost that state, doesn't really seem to be super useful to me.
But that's not the case. That's not the case here. And so this is not changed. It would just check, is the hook in place? If it is, it completely ignores the other behavior of the flag, and only the hook will be triggered. And otherwise, it would behave identical to strict. Yes, pretty much the same as uncaught exception, because it just throws an error instead.
Yeah. Having that be the default, I mean, as an option, I'd be okay. Having that be the default behavior, I'd say no.
I think that's what seems to be the biggest stumbling in any of the different options is like, are we willing to make it something that's breaking, like the change, switching from what we have today to something that will actually by default throw?
Yeah.
So we have the deprecation warning in place for a very long time, telling the users we would do something like this, and it would be pretty weird not to do it after, like, I don't know, like 6 versions minimum, and probably more. I think it's like 7 versions.
Yeah,
and we discussed. Sorry, we discussed this multiple times on the Collaborator Summit, and also what is a bit sad, I would like to invite some people from the Promises working group, because a lot was discussed there as well. And one point was that we would not want to have the flag that is now in place to be impacted by the unhandled rejection, unhandled rejections flag, hook, unhandled rejections hook, because it is somewhat like it was not the best idea maybe in the first place to add that. And instead, it would have been nice if we would just have been behaving similar to errors otherwise. But that's just one part of the opinion, and there are other people who believe different.
Right. I'm just going to point out that what we actually say in the deprecation warning is that we will terminate the node process with a non-zero exit code. It doesn't say that we're going to throw an exception. And as you know, I have voiced my preference for just changing the exit code. At least as the first step.
Sorry, I didn't mention it earlier that you brought that up in the, as comments in the PRs as well. So originally Benjamin, if I remember correct, wrote the deprecation message with the non-zero exit code, and that was iterated upon as well. So after long discussion, it was agreed upon that throwing would be probably the best for the user in the end, instead of just exiting with a non-zero exit code. One of the main reasons for that is that just exiting with a non-zero exit code does not provide a real good debugging experience for the users, and they don't have any clue where things are coming from. Honestly speaking, with unhandled rejections, they don't have that much debugging information either. So, yeah.
Right, but they would still have the warnings that tell them what was going on. And my point was just like you were talking about what we had been telling users for years via our deprecation warning, and I just wanted to clarify what that is.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem is I know there's been past suggestions we should just remove the deprecation warning, but we couldn't get consensus on doing that either. So it's in there partially for this long because there hasn't been consensus that what it says is what we should do, or not, right?
Right.
In the past. So, just because we've had something deprecated there for a while doesn't mean we have to keep it.
Right.
We have precedents in the past of doing that.
So one different way would be to have a survey about this. This was actually what we agreed upon a while back on a collaborator summit. And this would be something we would have to do again, and to just get a bigger opinion audience in a way, to see what the users would actually prefer. This was our original way of dealing with this on the long term. Now it's just a bit pushed forward because of those PRs.
So, I mean, I guess if there was a plan, why would we change the plan because somebody submitted a PR?
Well, in this case, the ideas that were brought up are at least something that we did not discuss as much. And like, for example, we did discuss about the flag, if it should adhere to the unhandled rejections or not, to the hook, sorry, to the hook. And we then decided, okay, we want to keep it completely separate because there were so many different opinions, and this was the only thing that we could agree upon on in the end. The question is now, should we still add it as another mode? Because if it's just added as a Zenver minor, then this would maybe be something some people would want to use. But this is just a guess.
I mean, I think it's, in my mind anyway, it's a much different question of like, yeah, add this as Zenver minor without changing the default or changing the default, right?
But the intent of the person is clearly to change the default to something more strict. And like, I do have an opinion on that as well. And it's clearly to make it more strict, but I also believe that more people want to have it strict than the other way around. But this is just, I don't have any hard numbers for this, you know. So that's why a survey would be good, to have actually some facts, and then to let the users decide what to do, if it's a clear picture at least. If it's not a clear picture, I guess we as a TSC should decide on what to choose, because we have to clear up this open part of Node.js at some point.
I mean, this has been a long-standing one that we definitely need to get some resolution on. And I think the ideas in the PRs are definitely worth discussing. I just think we need to iterate on them a little bit more. Yeah, I'm adding a comment to the one PR 33021 that kind of summarizes where I'm at. But definitely would love to hear from everyone else.
Yeah, I think it'll, like, I agree. You know, I'm not saying we shouldn't go through these PRs and you know, like you said, if it's new ideas, that's great. I just suspect we're going to bump up against that fundamental, you know, is it changing the default to something that's going to break people or not?
Just to clarify, it will only break people if they're receiving the deprecation warning today. Anyone that is not receiving the warnings will not be affected by this change.
That's true, but I believe some people actually want to use promises in a way that they don't cause an uncaught exception or a warning.
Sure, but there's the flag for that, and also the handler, which can be used to override the default behavior based on that request.
It is only possible to override the with the flag. So if you are using the flag, it's possible to silence it, but otherwise the flag would take precedence at the moment.
At moment, yes, but with the proposed request, the handler would be enough to silence the warnings as well.
With one of those suggested ones, but this is something.
Yeah, the last one.
I would be like, at least if it's silencing. No, if it's not only an added mode, then I would be strongly against it, because any module could add a listener in this case, and that's relatively likely to happen.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it would overrule the user's opinion in this case, and that's not a good idea, because the user originally opted into throwing an uncaught exception if it's the strict mode.
So what I'd want to suggest, I mean, yeah, I definitely don't want to short circuit the conversation here, but it definitely sounds like we just need to iterate and discuss on this more. The additional context, I mean, Ruben, I really appreciate you going through this summary and explaining that. There's definitely some details that I had missed across different discussions. But I think at this point, we just need to stew on it and then make a commitment that we're going to decide on this soon, like maybe next week.
I agree that we have to decide on it, and relatively soon. I'm not sure if it should be next week or not. I personally would still favor to have a small survey and then to decide if it is a clear picture in the survey for A or B. Then we should follow that. The question is, how do we write the things in a way that it is neutral for all the users and that they still understand the differences? That's the tricky part.
Yeah.
And I guess all I can think of is propose the survey and an issue, have the people who are interested, you know, refine it into something we can get consensus for it being neutral enough.
Yeah, but we definitely have to have an explanation as well for different things. Normally a survey would only be like, do you prefer A, B, or C? But I'm not sure if this would be sufficient in this case.
Yeah, it might. One thing that might actually be better than a survey, or at least prime a survey, would be actually writing a blog post on it. Here are the clear, concise choices, the clear options, right? And then doing a survey. Which of those do you know? Because I don't think a survey by itself is going to be enough to capture the nuances here.
That's true.
I mean, and that's one way you could get the blog post, like the survey out there, right? Like it could be a blog post and the link to the surveys at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. That would be a good idea.
The other thing too is, I mean, I think there's some threshold that we need for it actually to be a useful survey too, right? If we get like 3 respondents, that's not good enough. And I don't know what that number is, but.
Yeah.
It's very likely that we have a couple of thousand. So, I mean, even with my last survey I did on Twitter, I got more than 1,000 replies. I think it was like 1,200 or so. Then with surveys that we send out, if I remember correct, it was about 3,000 replies. So that's at least a decent number.
Yeah, no, as long as we get a good response, then that's definitely good data.
So I would be willing to be the champion for this, to also write a blog post. At least like I could write it down, and maybe Rich, would you be willing to read through it to correct grammar and stuff like that? Cool.
I mean, I think we should probably give the chance to, like, it, you know, because of the part about it being neutral enough. It's probably, I'd suggest we have it, you know, as an issue where people can comment and you can, you know, so that when it goes out, there's no complaints that it wasn't fair or neutral, right?
Yeah. I'll open it up in the promises working group as an issue there. As soon as I have like a rough draft, you know.
Okay.
Yeah. The other thing, you know, the other place there, not just if you don't want to do it, promise working group, is opening a PR on the website repo, right? Because that's where the blog post would be published, presentably.
Yeah, it could be cross posted as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. You can post it a couple other places.
And you can.
No, I definitely appreciate it. I mean, if you do end up doing the work on the blog post, definitely appreciate it. And I made the suggestion as, you know, I want to be sensitive to what time you have available. So I wasn't trying to say, hey, go off and do that work. But if you do end up doing it, I think it would be valuable. So, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, and if you reach out to Joe Seppi, he should be able to help with the survey side, coordinating with the foundation to help run that.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Okay, so I guess at this point, any more discussion we want to have on that before we move on?
I think that's it on my end.
Okay, so the next issue that was tagged was aligned with stream writable 31818. If anybody, I'm just looking to see who added it, but if it was you, please jump in.
I think it was Mateo that added this one or whatever. I mean, this.
It was me.
So this is one that I know that I need to go look at. And I just have not had the opportunity to do. I know Runnick's been putting a ton of effort into this and getting our streams implementation consistent. And I'd much rather see us improve the consistency here than not. But this is an area that's always been very kind of fraught with danger because of the way things like Express and some of the others kind of monkey patch into our implementation. So we run the very real risk of breaking stuff?
So here's the thing. I think this one's been pretty well reviewed. I think the main, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not looking at the issue right now, sorry, but I believe the main issue is that MSC Dex, Brian White, opposes to the way errors are handled.
Yeah.
And so this is really about that particular impasse, and not about necessarily about, you know, like other people might want to review it and have other objections or not, but it's, I think it has enough reviews, it has enough approvals, it ran CITGM without a problem, you know, without a new problem, and so on and so forth. I think it's really just about Brian's objection about the way the errors are handled.
I'm sorry, what PR number is it again?
I just pasted the link into the chat. It's 31818.
Yeah, this isn't about whoops, this isn't about like getting reviews and stuff. It's about an impasse. And it's an unusual impasse in that it's you know, most of our impasses are like a few people on one side, a few people on the other side, and this is not that. Which isn't to say that it's not worth, you know, looking at and considering, but there it is.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Now I'm looking at it, kind of refreshing my memory on this. Okay.
And James, you already thumbs up it, indicating that you.
Okay. I'm looking at it. I'm refreshing my memory on it. It's like, oh yeah. I did read it.
But I mean, sounds like, Rich, you think it's basically we need to have a vote, or like we need to reach consensus as to whether we're going to override, not necessarily a vote, but we need like to reach consensus whether we're going to override the objection or not.
Yeah, I mean, basically, you know, conversation has run its course. Brian's been pretty clear that he, you know, does not intend to, you know, that his objection still stands, and you know, conversation's been pretty extensive on it. You know, certainly given the narrow focus, certainly extensive enough. And yeah, it's just a matter of, okay, are we going to close the PR or are we going to land it despite the objection? So those are basically the only options. And at this point, it's really the TSC's decision to make.
And I think we could just open an issue in the TSC repo pointing to this, saying this is like weigh in this issue, right?
I mean, we could open another issue, or we could just, you know, get people to this issue. There is a emoji vote collection comment in there already, and it has three people voting, and Mateus now just indicated that he needs time to review and contemplate, which is one of the emoji reactions. So I think this just got added a couple days ago, I think, right? Not even 24 hours ago. So I would say let's just let people know. Please look at this and please weigh in, and we'll leave TSC agenda label on it, and we can review it again next week if there's not enough input or whatever. But I don't think we really need to have any complicated. I mean, this isn't a complicated issue, in my opinion. I mean, the PR has implications that are large, but the actual area that we're talking about reviewing and either saying, yeah, this is actually a problem or not, is pretty focused.
So, I have to say that it's actually fairly frustrating that the objection is no, without any kind of room for how do we negotiate around something that works better for everybody. It really just is like, no, I don't like this, and it's being left at that.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, sometimes there really isn't room for negotiation. It's just like, I believe strongly that small core versus or whatever, and there's nothing to be done. And I think that's, I mean, now getting into not framing the issue, but my personal opinion, I think that that's the case here, and I think yeah, I think we just need to make a decision, and I personally think that this should land.
So just a question here. If I remember correct, I mean, this PR is open for a while. Was it originally that it had a different error handling? Because at the moment it looks like it pretty much keeps everything as it was before, just a little bit more aligned with streams. But originally it would have emitted an error. I don't see that part anymore. And it does still throw in a couple of places, pretty much everywhere where it did before. So isn't it that it almost keeps everything behaving almost identical as before?
I would say that it certainly some changes were made to try to align with and address the concern that has been raised. And yeah, I would say that it is less drastic than it was before. Although I don't know that it was really that drastic before, but I don't know if anybody else more familiar with streams has a more meaningful comment to make. I don't know if Anna or James or anyone.
Not really. All of this code has been so inconsistent for so long. Runner's really been doing some fantastic work attempting to get more consistency. So in some ways it changes things, in other ways it's the changes are pretty subtle.
So
hard to classify.
So I know we have some private segment business to discuss, and we are getting pretty run up on the hour, and I think that this one we're not going to resolve today anyway. So let's just I move that we just kick it off to the GitHub issue tracker, tell people to review, leave an emoji, send email to TSC if you want to, comment in the issue tracker if you want to, but let's pick it up next week. But FYI, it's totally there.
Yeah, I basically noted in the minutes as, Rich has asked for TSC consensus on, overriding or not the objection in this, and here's the link to the comment. So basically TSC way in there, and if it gets to the point where we have consensus, it can happen. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is Node.js Docker node. This one we left on from last time. The discussion was active and ongoing. I don't know if anybody has an update as to whether
Nick asked that it be removed because we missed the window. They released it with Yarn, and so
okay.
maybe it's not a thing. So we probably, if we want to post-mortem this a little bit, we probably could have chosen to act quicker. I think I might have been one of the people who was like, let's let it, conversation's happening. Let's let it go for a week. Yeah, the window to do that has closed, and so I think the issue even closed, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Okay. Okay, so let's move on then. Nominations for TSC chair, just on as an FYI until that closes. You can still self-nominate until the April 30th. Node future directions, any interest in online or in-person summit. I took an action to try and make some concrete suggestions, which I haven't done. So nothing to discuss this week. The next one is, stop me if anybody does want to talk about any of these. The next one is the Node.js admin second director seat post July 2020. Just as context, Node.js got a director's, dedicated director seat for the first year. Wasn't the intention that would go on forever. And so before the next election period, we need to, the CPC needs to decide whether that will continue or not. And this is really on the agenda here to get the TSC's and the ComCom's feeling of, whether they'd like it to continue or not, or, basically, the data from the Node project saying, yeah, we really like it to continue, or no, we don't mind if we don't have that, to feed into the CPC decision. Given that we do have some private business, maybe we don't need to discuss it this week, but it is something that we need to, at least provide whatever input we want to in the next couple of weeks.
Private business, at least the private business I have won't take too long to discuss. It's more of just like a advisory heads up.
So
Okay.
I'd want to add like one quick thing on the CPC stuff. So I have not personally heard yet, but also I could have just been not paying attention during the meetings, an explicit stance from the CPC and if they have a preference and if they have candidates who are interested. So I wear a lot of hats here. So explicitly with my Node.js hat on, if the CPC is not making any sort of request for changing the status quo, I see no reason for us to push the status quo. Take off that hat and put on my CPC hat for a second. The bylaws explicitly said 1 year for Node and no longer Node specific afterwards than to be decided by the CPC. So I think the CPC needs to be consistent about this. And from that perspective, if we're not interested in it, we really should give the CPC a heads up. If we do want to keep it and don't really have a preference, if we do want to keep it, or at least like don't care about rocking the boat, I actually think it's completely reasonable for us to just send an ask to the CPC saying that we're willing to maintain, like that position and what it means from like a work perspective. If they want to keep the status quo going, I think just maintaining the status quo, if everyone's up for it, is very reasonable and probably doesn't need too much debating. But I would say like only really if the CPC is interested or if another project wants it, then maybe we need to have a broader discussion. But I guess that's also on the precipice that someone from our group wants to and can, by the bylaws, take on that role.
Right. I guess it's like I haven't heard any strong, like I haven't, also being on the CPC, I haven't heard any discussion saying we should do X or we should do Y. The only discussion is we need to make a decision by the right time, right? And so that's where I guess if we have strong feelings, expressing those, I think would influence the outcome. If we don't have strong feelings, and then we can express that as well. I'm just not sure how we get to the point where we, how we'd like to cast it.
Well, here's a really easy one that I think can, like, Michael, would you run again if you could?
Yeah, I'm happy to do it again for the next year. In fact, like I threw my name in the hat for the CPC voting members, specifically saying because you need to be a voting member to offer to become a director. Long answer, yes.
With that in mind, Michael, then like with my Node hat on, I feel like perfectly fine with that being enough signal that if the CPC wants to keep the seat for us, we're happy to keep the seat and have someone willing to do the work. Whether or not we want multiple people and to run an election is kind of secondary to that. But if you're willing to do it and have the time, that fills in that. And so like if there are no objections, I think a very reasonable next step is just telling the CPC that we are willing to maintain doing this work unless they would like to reallocate the seat. And if they'd like to reallocate the seat, we'd like to be part of that discussion. Like, I don't know if anyone has any concerns with that as an approach.
Yeah, I mean, no problems, no objections on that for me.
Okay. So I don't, Myles, do you want to maybe propose that in an issue? Because we've got to run it by the ComCom as well.
Oh yeah, I guess that's a good point. I would say, for what it's worth, though, and not just trying to pass the buck, but with Michael as you as our director and as the individual who's potentially offering to continue to do the work, I think it might make sense for you to open the issue. But if you're kind of time struck, I'm happy to.
It's not actually. I was just thinking, is there any conflict with me doing that? I'm happy to do it, but
I don't see a conflict because it's the what we're discussing doing it is like relying on the fact that you're willing to continue doing this work. Because if you weren't willing to consider doing it and there isn't someone else stepping up, then there's no reason for us to keep the seat.
Sure. No. Okay. Well, I'm okay with doing it. So I'll say, I'll cast it in. This is what was suggested in the CPC meeting. I just want to, avoid any perception of me doing something to keep or potentially keep the seat, right?
Yeah.
It's as opposed to a group decision.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
we trust you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's still a group decision and a potential election if more than one person runs. So it's not meant to be saying like it's absolutely yours.
Yeah.
It was more just
No.
like if the conversation is based on do we have someone who's still willing to do it and you're willing to do it, that seems like enough to lead that.
Yep.
Okay, I'll open an admin issue with the suggestion that we discussed here, and we can go from there.
So just keeping an eye on the clock. We're 8 minutes till the end of the hour, so we're going to
Right.
get to the private business. We should move on.
And I think that's, yeah, so we'll skip the strategic initiatives this week and move to the private business. Let me stop the stream.